Hello, everyone. This is Brian Jackson. Welcome to Lawed Up. This is the podcast where we teach you about the law. We got a good episode today, and also don't forget to like and subscribe for more of these podcasts on the law. And today we're talking about a case that is a national profile case, the Menendez brothers. And we'll go through the story and we'll talk about updates on what's been going on right now and break it down legally. So the Menendez brothers is a case that started back in 1989. Two brothers, teenagers. One was starting to go to Princeton University. The other was still in high school. And their parents were, the father was working for RCA. At one point, he was an executive and helping RCA with labels, writing labels. And in 1989, for whatever reason, these two brothers decided to the parents were down in the theater room. They were watching a movie, and these two brothers, they bought guns, and I think you had to wait a while to get certain guns, and so they decided to just get shotguns. And so they had shotguns, and they went down to where their parents were watching a movie, and they shot their parents, and it was a really bloody situation. I think some investigators said it was the bloodiest scene they've seen. There was carnage everywhere, and allegedly the mother, she was still alive after the first round of shotgun shells. They had to go up and get more shotgun shells and go down and finish off their mother. It's what forensics say, apparently, and she was still crawling on her hands, arms. And so these two brothers killed their parents, allegedly, is what happened. And they decided to go to a movie afterwards to have an alibi. And then they called the police and crying in the background. And then they blamed it on the mob. Police were doing an investigation and investigating, and then these two brothers started going off on a big spending spree, spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, going on lavish trips. They would go on trips to New York, New Jersey, and a big thing that came out recently was some guy on a podcast about 7 years ago on a criminal podcast said, "Oh, hey." I guess he randomly came across this basketball card of Mark Jackson playing at Madison Square Garden. It's a 1990s hoops card, and he said, "Wait a minute, those are the Menendez brothers sitting courtside." And so that kind of made the price of the Mark Jackson card go up somewhat in value because of how rare it was and having a picture of the Menendez brothers in it. And so apparently, according to this guy, I don't know if it's been completely confirmed or not, the Menendez brothers were also sitting courtside in New York Knicks games afterwards. And one of the big things of this case, too, was a therapist and talking to therapists, and one of the brothers during a therapy session apparently confessed to the murder of his parents. And this therapist told his girlfriend at that time, and then they broke up, and I think the girlfriend told the police too, and I think that was a big part of the evidence as well. But the big fight there in getting the evidence in is because there's evidence, but then also you have to get evidence in trial. And there's certain rules of evidence that have to be followed, and there's certain protections of evidence. And so, with attorney-client communication, usually that's always privileged, protected evidence. And there's a reason behind it, because they want people to feel safe, comfortable talking with their attorneys, and also so attorneys can properly represent their clients. So, so that kind of evidence typically cannot come in except really, really out there circumstances, attorney-client privilege. And so also with attorney-client privilege is the doctor-patient privilege. And attorney-client privilege is one of the strongest privileges there are. Doctor-patient, there could be exceptions to the doctor-patient privilege. There's also spousal privilege, and then also clergy privilege. So there was a fight in whether or not this admission to the therapist could come in at trial. And eventually the ruling was that it could, because there was an abuse of the therapist-patient privilege. I guess I think the son that admitted to it, I think he was abusive to the therapist, and so they claimed because of the abuse that it couldn't be considered privileged information. So that evidence was able to come in. And then also a big reason why police started looking at the boys was their lavish spending, and they were kind of like, okay, what's going on? Why are they going on this spending spree? And kind of a motive of they wanted money, and basis for killing them. And so a big defense for the Menendez brothers was at trial was the abuse of the parents. And so they were claiming emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and sexual abuse. And so that was a big thing during the trials. And there were several trials. There was a few mistrials. And so even though the killings happened in 1989, the actual convictions didn't happen until 1995, 1996, so 7 years after actual killings. And there were mistrials because of the defenses of abuse, and so they said that they were psychologically abused and by the mother and the father, and also sexually abused. And the big defense there for the prosecutors was, well, how come you didn't tell this to your therapist? And also, I think there was one boy who said that it didn't happen. It stopped at 8 years old. One continued to claim that it continued to happen right up to the murders. And so that was their defense. And so they had a half male, half female jury, and it seemed like the female jurors always got hung up and wouldn't convict, and there was 2 mistrials as a result. And then finally there was a trial, and they convicted them of murder. And I talk about murder in my podcast. And they were charged of first-degree murder, premeditated murder, where you have the intent to kill beforehand. They had a defense of heat of passion and everything that they had done to all the parents had done to them. But the problem with the heat of defense passion was there wasn't imminent. The prosecutor was saying, well, they weren't in imminent danger at the time they did the killings. And then also, I mean, just the fact that they went back and had to reload to finish off their mother, they said couldn't be a defense. So ultimately they were convicted, but they didn't receive the death penalty, and they received life without parole. So that's kind of the background of what was going on. And then what's going on right now with the Menendez brothers is apparently in 2018, they were able to see each other again in prison. They had been in prison for 22 years at that time. And so they started talking, and with the back and forth, they said, I guess there was mention of this letter that existed of mentioning abuse that occurred that wasn't able to come in at trial. And then also a big thing that came up as well recently was because the father was an executive of RCA, and he was dealing with records and signing of individuals. A person came forward in who signed a record, like a boy brand or something, and signed an affidavit saying that there was a night where Mr. Menendez drugged him and sexually abused him, essentially. And so he signed a declaration of that as well. And so and a couple attorneys that were part of his appeal, their original appeal said that we never saw this original letter to that the brothers had talked about in 2018. And so they filed a habeas petition. And so what that is under the Constitution is you have the right to habeas corpus. And so what habeas corpus is if any of you are familiar with the movie The Count of Monte Cristo. So in the Count of Monte Cristo, there's a guy who's accused of treason with Napoleon, and he was the first mate of a ship. He wanted to become captain, and they went shipwrecked, or somebody got sick, on a ship, and they were on an island where Napoleon had been cast out to, and Napoleon asked him to send him a letter to someone, and so he took the letter, and he didn't know how to read, and then he got tried for treason, and the big problem behind it was his brother didn't, or one of his friends was jealous of him, and there's some other jealousy, and prosecutor, the letter was supposed to be sent to his father, and the prosecutor's father, and so it was just this innocent guy who couldn't read, and everyone wanted him out for other reasons, and so he gets sent to the Shadow G forever. And so the big thing is, when he's in the Shadow D, which is prison in France, he keeps asking the guys, what's my crime? What's my crime? So the whole purpose of habeas corpus is to allow to have that kind of review on, okay, what is this person's crime? What did they do? Instead of they're just stuck down there forever without any kind of appeal or review process. So it's a very important process, very important due process part in our system, allowing, especially, even though we have trials and we have prosecutors, we have defendants, and there's a big, there's kind of a screening process there where, both sides are able to tell their story, and evidence is supposed to get in, and that's a very important process, trial, and being the right to be tried by your peers. But also there's some things that that can happen in trial that can get messed up. And I mean, the big thing that people bring in habeas petitions is saying, well, my counsel was ineffective. They didn't do everything they should have done as a defense attorney. They should have raised this defense. They should have done this. They should have brought in this evidence. They didn't investigate this person. And that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit for defendants, and the biggest petitions that you see on habeas is, you just go after the defense attorney and say they did everything wrong. But it's still a really high standard to prove that an attorney was ineffective. You have to prove that they really, really messed up. And there could be reasons for them not bringing in certain evidence, not calling certain witnesses. So usually it's hard to say that your attorney is ineffective. But also on habeas appeals, you can bring in stuff if there's new evidence showing that there could have been a likelihood of change in the outcome of a trial, or something that should have been considered during sentencing. And so in this case, that's what we have, is we have this letter that they claim existed that was in, I think they found it was like a letter to a cousin or something that they say was found in the top of a drawer. And, obviously 20, 30 years down the road, prosecutors want to be sure to make sure that that is legitimate evidence and it's not evidence that has been fabricated down the road just to try and get somebody off. But probably the most important piece of evidence here is the other individual that claimed they were sexually abused. And also, I think the law in California has changed a bit as it comes to defense of sexual abuse as well, where back in the day you had to prove that the abuse was imminent and that you were acting in self-defense against yourself at that time where you were about to be abused. I think that's changed up a little bit, where if there has been a history of self-defense, of abuse, and even though it may not have been happening at that time, it's a stronger defense than it was. And so that's part of the reason I believe too they are bringing this petition at this time, and then those new pieces of evidence are important as well. And so what's going on right now is it sounds like the prosecutor for Los Angeles County is giving it some credence with the new evidence. So there's been a bunch of declarations, affidavits that have been filed in this petition. And that's pretty much what they are. It's declarations of affidavits of the two brothers, of their trial attorney, and then of this individual from the band who said he was abused as well. And so they had a hearing back in October, and the judge decided that this is sufficient evidence to say that they can be re-sentenced at this time. So now the judge is going to re-sentence them on the 11th of December. And so right now they've served about 30 years in prison. They didn't have possibility of parole. And so now with re-sentencing, there could be the possibility of parole. And it sounds like the judge is going to grant parole with this new change in law and this new evidence. And so that would most likely allow them to get released at this time. So there's a big back and forth on people supporting the Menendez brothers and their side of the story and why they should have been released, and then people who oppose it as well on how a lot of people are just concerned about how messy and calculated these types of murders were, and allowing these two individuals to go free. So that's where we are, but it looks like they will most likely be released on parole, but we'll see what happens in December. And again, like and subscribe to get more updates on the law. This is Brian Jackson with Lawed Up signing off.